It's
All
behind.
right, guys, welcome to episode 22 of
Sure.
Beyond the Weight Room podcast. Today we have me and my co-host, Mr. Ryan Hurston. We're going to go through pretty much the Journal of Sports Medicine and SCA's research, some of the titles, and kind of give our 2 cents on some of the most recent topics on sports science.
Yeah, this is completely without reading the article. We're just going to go over the headline and kind of talk about it. So I want that to be known. It's not anything that we've read through any of the articles. We're just going to read the titles on the January 2025 issue and go through it that way. So I will get the ball rolling. This is all original research that's being published in the January 2025 issue. The first headline is the impact of stance width on kinematics and kinetics during maximum back squats. I would assume that means they're just going to have people stand at different ratios or widths and see what it does with the sequencing muscle activation of a back squat. So let's just open it up. Brett, what do you got initially on that?
I mean, are you talking about like what type of muscles are firing or to what type of force is produced?
Really wherever you want to take it. Like,
so I would say for me personally, it's dependent on the person. So I don't know. I'm interested in what the research is saying as far as overall force production. I know for me, I tend to be in a wider squat stance. When I changed to a wider squat stance, I had already moved for powerlifting wise to doing more of a sumo deadlift. So I had a kind of a low bar style hip drive, wide stance squat, which is very similar to my deadlift pull. And I feel like those really played on top of each other very well. Obviously, you're going to get a little bit more low back, a little bit more adductors in that position versus narrow stance. It's going to be way more knee dominant, right? You're going to have a lot more hip mobility, ankle mobility, which I don't, at least not to the capacity to be able to get the depth that I want. So
I think we can take this a lot of different ways. I guess my first thing is, have you ever heard that people of Germanic culture, like European descendants, typically have wider squat stances due to femur head fitting into the acetabulum?
Yeah.
So people of like Germanic cultures typically are going to be wider squatter. So some of it comes down to kind of your diversity. People of
Western bloc countries typically, they'll have basically a flatter surface that the hip's going into. It gives it more range of motion potentially.
And then, most Olympic level lifters are going to be narrow squatters because they're doing more Olympic level lifting. They're going to be high bar back squatters. There's 100 different ways we can go on this, right? Like, I guess the question for you is like, because you're a wide stance squatter, when you have worn powerlifting shoes or weightlifting shoes in the past, do you still find them effective for wide stance?
Like weightlifting shoes with heels lifted?
Yeah.
A lot of times my limiting factor probably is my ankles. So I'm definitely been more narrow. Since I made the switch, since I started going deeper into powerlifting like 3 or 4 years ago, when I started getting a wider stance, I stopped doing as much Olympic lifting, mainly because I just kind of hurt my knee in a power clean, and probably more fear than anything, but also getting older. I was like, I want to move to more of a slower strength-based sport versus a power strength-based sport, kind of leaning into that dad strength. So I started squatting in the same position, and I kind of naturally started moving, just playing around my squat stance, started moving it out. So I would say in that instance, the heel elevation didn't help me. I moved to flat feet. I usually go barefoot or something like that. If I was in a narrow stance, I think definitely the heel elevation helps, which is why it's really easy to do. Not easy, but it's easier to do squats, overhead squats, front squats with Olympic lifting shoes, which is why they're made for that. So
setting your angles and being able to get more dorsiflexion. So I don't know. That's, I think, somewhat of an interesting just research topic, is looking at different musculature used during things like that. Like you said, like you're going to use more probably posterior chain, low back on a wide stance than you are on like a narrow stance. So that's one topic. We can go ahead and move on to the next one, which is The headline's lengthy. It's the use of self-selected rest interval method is as effective for optimizing post-activation performance enhancement in elite athletes as employing the best fixed rest interval. The way I read that is like, can people accurately self-time their rest with or without a clock in their face?
I mean, I would assume you could. Like, are you feeling good or not? But only a caveat to that would be if you're being lazy and like waiting too long or getting distracted with your phone. I find myself doing that sometimes if I'm not timing my rest. My workouts might take longer. I might get more cooled down, which you're not going to get as much potentiation after a heavy lift or something like that. If I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm going to take 1 minute. And then all of a sudden I look up and it's been 5 minutes because I'm, you know, looking at idiots like us on Instagram.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've always found that when I actually use a clock, my workouts are a lot better than when I just dick around and think I know how I'm using my rest. Like that's why I've become such a big proponent of using like a stopwatch. I think like depending on how you lift, right? Like if you're more like the powerlifting style or you're more geared towards like a max strength, like you need to take longer in between your sets. I think that's a slippery slope and it can turn into you know, scrolling or having 2 hour long lifting sessions because you're constantly shooting for 90+% of your 1 rep max and you're doing low amounts of reps during one set, and you might have gear that you're also wearing as well, whether that be, you know, a belt, sleeves, shoes, straps, whatever. I think it just sets itself up to be more like slow when it comes to the lift because you're focused on strength. I don't know. I think it just depends on who they tested, right? Are they testing people that are doing it interval training? Because if you go in with the preconceived notion that you're doing interval training, like you're gonna assume that you need less rest mentally than if it's like, hey, I got 5 sets of.
Well, I think from the potentiation terminology in that it's probably strength based. So I would say, especially if it's like a controlled setting, like research or whatever, and you're kind of sitting down, it's like, all right, let us know when you feel good, that they're probably going to show similar effects to what you would rest anyway.
I think it comes down to people have good internal clocks and some people have shitty internal clocks. I have a really shitty internal clock, so I have to keep like a manual check in front of me.
Yeah, I have plenty of athletes where I have, like, especially if I have a one-on-one with an athlete, it's very challenging when you're doing plyometrics sometimes or like sprinting, skipping. They get back to the line and they want to go right away again. And you're like, no. You got to chill for a sec because especially something like sprinting or power based, you know, it's going to take a little bit longer. You might not feel as fatigued from that. But if it's like strength based, I would assume that it's probably fairly accurate.
Yeah, the sprinting and power based stuff is always kind of tricky when it comes to like athletes who you have to kind of pump the brakes for, especially if you're working at like a 1 to 10 work to rest. Like if they run a 15-yard sprint, by the time they get back, walking back, like they're going to feel like they're ready to go. And you have to just like tell them like, no, not yet. Even though they like feeling wise, they're not going to feel any immediate difference from 1 rep to the next. I've always found that to be somewhat funny going through that type of training with athletes.
What we got next?
Let's see. Absolute agreement between subjective hand squeeze and objective hand grip strength in adults.
What does that mean? I don't know what that's saying.
I don't know. The way that I read that when I was going through is like, I always think when people talk about like the hand grips, like the dynamometers, is that like you've heard it, like the stronger your grip strength as you age, the more akin it is to living like a healthier life as you age. Like grip strength is a factor or there's a correlation between grip strength and physical activity in later life. So what do you kind of got on that?
Yeah, that's something we actually test with. We do like a executive wellness program, and I have 2 different like ways that they can go with it. They can go more sports training specific, where they're going to run, jump, strength, or they can do like BMI, waist circumference, and like those are the people that don't want to sweat during it. And I do like a grip strength just to get like an idea of how strong they are and how much lean muscle they have. I think there's a correlation with that. I mean, I know there's a correlation. I don't think it's a causation necessarily of you living longer, But I think if you have more lean mass and you're a stronger individual, you're in better shape, you're probably going to have better grip strength overall. I think that's more what they're trying to say from that correlation research.
I agree with you. I think it's one of those things where it's like, like when you look at, have you read Outlive by Peter Attia?
No.
You know that book? That's a really good book because it kind of talks about like how do you age effectively throughout life with nutrition and endocrinology, mentally and then physically. He brings up the whole grip strength thing as well. And it's like, it's one of those factors that plays into the overarching picture of like, how do you age effectively? Like traditionally and typically, if we're looking at hundreds of thousands of adults and we have all of their grip strengths, typically people with a higher grip strength live X amount of years longer. It's just like when you see those biopsies of people's legs that show, not biopsies, but imaging of people's legs that show like muscle to fat ratio in a 65-year-old, and you got one guy whose legs just all jelly and one guy who's got actual muscle. Like,
you're more active. If you're more active, you're typically going to live longer.
And if you're more active, you're probably going to have a better grip strength than somebody who's not active. I think that's
great handshake.
Great handshake. Do you think? Well, you do jujitsu, so you have to have strong hands.
You hope so.
On guys.
All over guys.
What is have you measured your grip strength recently?
Yeah, I did actually like last week.
Where are you at? Can I guess where you're at?
Do you want to guess?
Am I going to be higher or lower than what you think I would guess?
I can't tell you that.
I think you're probably.
Do you know what the standards are?
You're probably like 186.
Dude, I was 189.
Yeah, that was close.
How'd you guess that?
Because most guys, I think, that are like relatively strong can produce anything from like 150 up to 200.
Yeah, it was. I looked up just the general like standards, and for people our age, it was like 100 to 120 was average or something like that.
That's poop.
Yeah, it is poo-poo, but a lot of people we work with are sit at a desk all day and don't do much, or somewhere around 100. I would assume since I deadlift and do jujitsu that it would be a little bit stronger. Most people, when I'm rolling, aren't breaking my grip from a collar tie or something.
Yeah. It is funny though, because guys, especially in baseball, this is what I've noticed too, not just pitchers, but position players, guys that you don't think guys that are not the strongest sometimes have really, really, really good grip strength. Like,
I don't think it's a direct correlation with strength, but I think it is. So obviously it's associated with reducing or increasing, I guess, longevity. But I don't think it necessarily means you're going to be stronger. It just means you're either more or less in shape.
Yeah. I remember.
Now, if you're going from like 150 to 200, then maybe it has something to do with that.
I remember we tested it with the TPH kids, and there was like a 14-year-old. I can't remember his name. Big kid, but he had like a 172. It's like a 14-year-old. It was like, holy crap! Like, I know they always talk about like their flex on their sticks and stuff. So interesting. Moving on. This one talks about the effects of halftime re-warm up and subsequent agility and power performance in basketball players. So I think this could, we could talk about, like, you played football. I didn't really play football. Baseball, there's no re-warm up. I played basketball, but like in high school, you don't really do that. Do you think there's any merit to like needing to re-warm up after a halftime?
Either re-warm up or stay warm. I would potentially rather just stay.
Yeah, that's kind of high.
I mean, because you have usually 20 minutes, at least in football, I know.
Is that what it is? 20?
Pro and college, and I guess high school, 20 minutes. I don't know what basketball is, but let's say it's something similar. I mean, you can get off the court and maybe go in and just do. Personally, I would do like mobility stuff to keep things moving, keep things tight, and then maybe just going straight into like some basic plyometrics skipping. So if you want to call that a warm up, sure, but I'm kind of seeing as more like active recovery, CNS prep.
Yeah, I think the way that they wrote that title means like they're going to go through the full warm up again, which just sounds like a fucking waste of time, especially using even college level athletes. Like, they're going to go out there, they're going to do some fucking layups and shoot some threes and be ready to go, because realistically, I don't think you cool down that fast, especially doing like in a sport like basketball, doing a bunch of plyos, because that's all basketball is sprinting and plyos. Like,
yeah, man, it's going to take you 5 to 10 minutes of sitting there to get like everything back down to normal. So if you're coming in and like you guys want to adjust something in the play, which is extremely important as well, like you need to sit there and listen to your coach probably for 5 or 10 minutes anyway. So it's like maybe we just do some mobility work while you're doing that, and then spend 5 minutes doing some base plyos.
well, I'm sure at a high level too, like those guys, like they might go in for halftime and have meetings or have like quick breakdowns, but the majority of the time, like they're going to still be moving around.
Yeah, spinning on a bikes, or I mean, you see that in football with the guys or the sidelines spinning on the bikes.
It's not like back in the day where they go in and have a cigarette during halftime.
Or use Normatex.
Yeah.
Dude, when I was at the Rockies Stadium, we were playing the Rockies out in Phoenix there. We were playing some Korean team. And they were all wearing turtlenecks and just smoking heaters the whole fucking game.
Is it for like the World Baseball Classic or something like that?
Yes, I don't remember. We were for spring training. I don't know why they were over there, but or not spring training. Sorry, it was in the fall. So
okay,
fall ball. But
yeah. Next one. Different external cues elicit specific kinetic strategies during a drop jump in well-trained adolescent soccer players. So I think it's just talking about external cues with people that are relatively trained.
Yeah, and how external cues can change things. We see that all the time in testing. So when I've done force plate testing, I've had that conversation with our coaches. It's like we need to make sure everybody is saying the same cues. Because if I tell you, hey, step off this box, jump as high as you can, or step off this box and go as quick as you can off the ground, those are going to show me very different rate of force developments, because one person is going to try to like just ricochet and, you know, maybe they're 10 inches off the ground. Next person is going to spend more time loading in that landing phase and producing force out of that and jumping actually as high as they can. So it's going to show either a way better or way shittier eccentric rate of force. It's a completely different test. So use math a ton.
1,000% agree. That's why when I've done vertical jump training in the past, like we don't cue people. It's just, I guess the only cue that we ever use is jump as high as you can.
Yeah. I mean, then that's a cue, because I think you need to cue, even with testing. It just needs to be the same thing every time.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, you're manipulating data when you tell people how to jump. So it's like, what's the most objective cue externally when it comes to doing something like a vertical jump test? And I think that's where I go to like, what's the primary reason to do a vertical jump test? To jump as high as you can. That's what it's always been, right? Like when you're doing it at this combine, whatever, like across the board, it's always been, you do vertical jump to see how high you can jump. So you're just giving that same cue, and then you're looking at how they sequence to be able to perform that task. I think though, like what you said, right? Like if you can influence data dependent upon cues that you give. And that's something that I'm always like very interested in when it comes to studies around, especially counter movement jumps, is like in a paper, they're not always going to say how they cued the athlete. They might say like, we cued the athlete, but they don't always say how they cued the athlete. So there's a big difference, and it can manipulate a lot of things.
Yeah. You can show somebody's improving quite a bit by just changing your cues.
How did you handle that with U.S. ski team? Was there anything with that, like when it came to specific jumps during the sport?
During the sport, or you mean?
Like, was there any like transferability from how you measured people on force plates to like how their coaches, their sport coaches?
No, because I mean, with aerials, for instance, they're not jumping off a jump. They're staying locked out as straight as they can and letting the force of the speed of the skis and everything take them off. So they're not really producing force from the ground. They're more like doing acrobatic arm drops and trying to keep that core stable.
Yeah.
And typically with free skiing, it's more of a rotational thing at that point. So again, they're not jumping off the jump. They're going like wide skis, rotating up. And usually like those skis come together as they're like producing force in a rotational manner from the ground. So it's not really a jump. So I don't say it doesn't directly correlate with that by any means. And
did you guys measure like impulse?
What was that?
Did you guys measure like impulse?
Yeah.
Because like when you can time your jump, right? Like volleyball players, skiers, snowboarders, like they can pre-plan their jump a little bit further ahead than like a player that's reactive to a ball, right? Like they know when they're approaching the spot on the ramp where they need to start loading, so their impulse is going to be a lot bigger.
Yeah, it's pre-planned. I mean, planned for them. The issues typically are like when something goes wrong, right? When you're coming out, you're not in the place you want to be in the air, and you have to try to correct things, whether it be core stability or you're landing too far left, and you have to fix it right, or you catch an edge, or you hit a rail weird or something like that. Like catching those things, that's more or less why we did the plyometrics versus like you need that quick reaction of like, oh shit, and catch yourself versus actually like jumping onto a rail or jumping off a jump.
Give me a little insight into like a skier and aerials knows they're in like a bad position in the air. Like they recognize that immediately, and like how do they correct that?
So aerials is unique in the sense of their coach is going to be standing on the knoll. Do you know what a knoll is? Or knoll. So you have the jump. Right behind the jump is like it kind of snow goes up a little bit, and then the landing comes. So the knoll is like the top right behind the jump. Coach stands there, and when aerials go off, they'll actually listen to what their coach is saying while they're in the air, and it'll tell them if they're overstretching or if they're over rotating, under rotating, slanting, whatever. And then they can actually use their arm drops to change the direction, slow down, speed up their spins, tilt left or right. So for instance, if my hands are in the air and I'm jumping on a trampoline just straight up and down, if I jump in the air and I drop one arm, momentum is going to tilt me that direction because every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? So if I do the same thing, I have one arm down, one arm up, and I switch them, it's going to tilt me like twice as much because that momentum is increasing. So I can increase that tilt speed faster or slower. And then that you take that into rotations. If I'm doing a backflip, the way physics works, same thing. If I'm going straight backflip, everything's nice and straight, arms are overhead, and I drop my right arm, it's going to rotate me to the right as I'm doing a backflip. So instead of tilting you now because I'm rotating backwards, it starts spinning you. So that's how you spin. That's how divers spin. That's how gymnasts spin when they have their hands up and they're doing those arm drops. And what will happen is guys or girls will go off, and let's say they went way too big. Their coach will say stretch, 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 and they're going to stretch as far as they can out to slow down that rotation, which means if they have to finish their spinning, they're going to have to do all the arm work up overhead. And if they go off and if they're good, they just say they're good. If they're going too slow and they need to speed up the rotation, they're going to say like tuck, 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 and they're going to slow everything down, bring those arms down by their hips, bend a little bit, do the arm drops down by their hips. It's going to bring that momentum in tighter, so they'll spin tighter to try to finish that landing. So they actually will control their shit in the air, hopefully. Yeah. Sometimes.
It's a lot to process.
What was that?
It's a lot to process, right? Like coach sees it live time, processes it, does it to the athlete who has to process it while upside down, however many feet in the air.
Finishing the trick. So they go in with a planned trick, so they know what their trick is that they're doing.
Yeah, but still, I think it's impressive.
Now, yeah, some of the more impressive stuff I've seen. We had a kid, I remember one time, he's a gold medalist now, so he's pretty good in the Olympics. He went off when we were in Switzerland. He was going off a double. So the jumps are singles, doubles, and triples, and that's typically the amount of flips you do off of it. Everybody does doubles and triples. Singles is at least at the high level. He was going off a double, so just a training jump, right? And he went off fucking super fast, or something happened where his feet went out from underneath him a little bit faster than normal. It just looked weird coming off, and he like whipped into the jump. And they were like, they were telling him to stretch because like he was going way too big. And he instinctively just fucking tucked and did a third flip and landed, like bounced out of it, like onto his feet and like got out of it. Did a triple off of a double because he instinctively like knew if he was stretching, he wasn't going to like slow down enough.
Yeah.
So the coach is telling him like, you're still an athlete. You still have to like know how to fix those things. And that's why all those athletes were usually like acrobatic athletes. Most of them came from a background of moguls or gymnastics or trampoline or something. They taught them how to actually do the sport.
That's why no matter how good a coach can be, at the end of the day, the athlete and their ability far outweighs whatever a coach can do for them. Like the percentage of actually helping in those moments as a coach is very close to zero. You just have to, they have to rely on their,
I think a coach helps a lot more of the preparation before and after, right? because I mean, 90% of those athletes, when they went off the jump, they probably knew, they've done it thousands of times. They probably knew if they were too big or too short, but having the confidence that you're going to trust that coach, and even that confidence beforehand of like, they're like radioing up to you and like, hey, we're doing double full, double full, which is pretty fucking hard trick. You're going to go off and you're going to have enough speed and everything, because they take a lot of stuff into consideration when they're making the decisions of what trick they're going to do, because they can only do it once in that competition and then they burn it. And if they're looking down, the coach has to decide if it's windy, is it too much wind? How much wind is pushing behind versus forward? They have to decide if they need to take 2 skis up because there's 2 mile an hour more wind than there was last time or whatever. Like, the coach decides all that shit, and the athlete has to trust them and have that confidence go down and rip it.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Good to hear that. All right, last one. Fairly easy topic in my opinion. Comparison. This is the meta-analysis. Comparison between eccentric and concentric muscle actions on hypertrophy. A systematic review and meta-analysis. It says it's a brief review, so I'm sure like somebody just had an addendum to this research that's already existed. I think this research is pretty well known when it comes to effects of the eccentric versus concentric muscle actions on hypertrophy. But what do you got?
Well, eccentrics have been shown to increase hypertrophy more, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Nobody wants to do them, but putting time under tension, hypertrophy happens because of time under tension. So time under your load. So it could be either eccentrics. So you're spending 10 seconds under the bar because you're doing, I don't want to do math. Let's just say 2 reps of 5 seconds, or you're spending 10 seconds under the bar because you're doing 10 reps that are a second each. You know what I mean? Like that tension that's under the muscle. I mean, and that's been shown 1,000 times. I'm surprised that that's on like a new research.
I don't know if it's new research. It's under a brief review. So I'm sure somebody added something to it, but I always think of it like sleds, right? Like you can load up sleds as heavy as piss, and that is purely most of the time a concentric muscle action, which is why you're not going to be muscularly sore from doing sleds. Now, granted, like if you jump up however many hundreds of pounds and you haven't done sleds in a year or whatever, like, yeah, you're going to be sore just because of the action of activity. But like that versus full range of motion back squat, moderate back squat, like that's going to blow you up way more just from the eccentric action that happens on the muscle fiber itself and the muscle fiber bundles. Like eccentric stress to the muscle fiber is going to cause damage, which creates that inflammatory process, which leads to,
soreness,
but it also leads to repair and size when it comes to hypertrophy.
Yeah, if you don't want to be sore, just do concentrics.
I think that's a great way to say it, right? Like nobody gets sore from doing speed squats. What they get is tired. Like they get very neuromuscularly fatigued and they're going to feel like shit. They're just not going to be like struggling to sit down on the toilet like they would if they're doing eccentric rear foot elevated split squats.
Yeah. I started kind of taking notes on just anytime I come across certain topics, I'm kind of doing my own. I mean, I don't know how you are, but I sometimes will just do pseudo research on my own when I see a topic that I don't necessarily understand. And so eventually make posts out of some of these. So we can go over some of these if you want.
Yeah, let's do it. We got some time.
We got a couple nutrition ones. So I think one of the more basic ones is the calories in, calories out diet model versus a bunch of these other diet models. So you can talk about keto, carnivore, vegan. You can talk about like carb loading, carb cycling, like all that kind of stuff. That's what I meant, not carb loading. So for me, at least, I've always felt that the calories in, calories out. I think like that. So many people are trying to complicate things as much as possible, and I understand not everybody's built the same, and it's going to be harder for some people, and not as hard for others to either gain or lose weight. But at the end of the day, like if you're burning X amount of calories to stay alive and to move and everything, and you're taking in less than you're burning, like you're gonna lose weight. And typically, from research that I've read, a lot of these other diets that have shown to help people lose weight, whether it be from intermittent fasting or, like I said, carb cycling or vegan, keto, carnivore, whatever. People are saying they feel good, they've lost weight from all these. Most of them are still showing that they're having reduced calories in those diets. So it's great if you want to do that diet, but it's like to say that that's the only thing and that's the best way to lose weight is that specific way. It's like, dude, I mean, I don't know. I don't understand the big issue with the calories in, calories out. And it seemed to be like starting to get demonized sometimes.
I think I agree. I think, like when you talk about like intermittent fasting, like that, I think that's a very popular way that people find success with dieting or nutrition or whatever word you want to use. But at the end of the day, like at the core of that, it's calorie restriction. Like you're giving yourself a window of time. Same thing with the carnivore diet, right? Like if all you're eating is protein versus, for the most part, you're eating fats too. But like if you're reducing carbs, the typical person, especially here in America, is going to eat too many carbs. So if you're reducing, from 300 grams of carbs a day to 0, that's 1,200 calories that you're just taking out of your diet right there. So again, at the core, I agree. It's when it comes to nutrition, like the answer is always, the truth is always in the simplest answer most of the time. It's just not what sells. I think a lot of those diets, carnivore, ketogenic, intermittent, at the core of all of them, it is just calorie reduction. Now, within that, I think, if you're trying to optimize, right? Like if I'm doing intermittent fasting and it's going to reduce my calories because I'm used to eating 4,500 and I'm eating 3,500 or 3,000, like I still want to make sure I'm getting enough protein if I'm trying to maintain muscle mass. But like, what's your goal? Is your goal to lose weight? Like, is that the biggest priority, or is it maintaining muscle mass? Like, I think that
people tell me they want to lose weight, they want to lose fat. Nobody wants to lose muscle.
They want to look better naked, right?
Yeah. Like that kind of leads into the next like topic I had, which is going more into like GLP-1, so like Ozempic and all those shots, and like that versus diet. I don't know if you have any strong feelings on that or anything you want to start off with.
I don't really know a whole lot about GLP. I know is like I've worked with people with PCOS in the past, and I can understand from working with them and talking extensively about their nutrition, diet, sleep, recovery, and them still not seeing results, how something like that could benefit them. But that is a very insular, very niche viewpoint that I have on it. I'd be interested to hear what you got.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple clients that have done it as well and had success, and I think it's good in the sense it helps people lose weight and it can help kickstart a lot of people. Going back to our previous conversation about calories in, calories out, that's basically what it is, because all it's doing is slowing down. It's releasing the hormone that makes you feel full and slows down the actual digestion process. So if you eat a dinner, a lot of times I'd have people come and work out with me the next morning, and I typically want people to eat breakfast before they work out, but they're like, I'm literally still full. Like I feel like I just ate, because it slows down the digestion process. So they're just having way less calories. So again, like you had talked about, you have had clients that have like tried to lose weight through, diet and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, I mean, if they hop on GLP-1, like they're just reducing their calories. So like you can do that yourself. It's just fucking hard. And it might be harder for some people.
Yeah, I think there's probably some times from like a endocrinology standpoint that like there are people out there that have tried all methods and it's not going to work for them, and they do need the assistance of medication. I don't know if that's exactly the one.
Well, I'm saying is like I've had people like that, and they're like, oh yeah, I just whatever, I have this going on. But my thoughts, I'm just like, this drug just slows down your digestion. So you saying that you have hormone issues, endocrine issues, and you take Ozempic and you lose weight, it's like, well, it's because you're eating you're absorbing less calories. Like that's all it is.
Yeah.
You're eating less. It's a drug that makes you eat less comfortably.
Yeah, but nicotine does that. Just chew.
Yes. Well, that also makes you fucking.
You're saying chew tobacco.
What I'm saying is, I mean, I think it's a good drug in one sense. I'm not having an issue with it. It's always like not mind blowing to me, but people are like, oh, I started taking this and I finally started losing weight. This is the godsend. I'm like, it's
really doing sexy. the celebrities do it too, though.
Yeah. Also, it makes it easier, which I get.
What are your opinions? I got some wild stuff off that, but what are your opinions long term on Ozempic? Like,
So I don't really know much long term, like as far as research goes of health concerns. My only health concern that from research I've read is about loss of muscle mass. So you need to make sure that you're eating enough to maintain at least a good amount of muscle mass, so you're not losing too much strength, which could we know having lower lean muscle mass as you age, like we had talked about before, is a precursor for a lot of things, a lot of issues that could potentially cause death. One of the studies I'd read was an 8-week-long trial on semaglutide. They had 140 participants. They lost 23 total pounds of fat and 15 pounds of muscle in 8 weeks. Like you lost a lot of weight, but you lost 15 pounds of muscle.
Yeah, that's a lot. The average of that group did 140 people. The average over how many weeks?
Yeah, 8 weeks.
Over 8 weeks, they lost 23 pounds of fat and 15 pounds of muscle.
Yes.
That's just a lot of
weight
in general. That's
I don't know what how heavy. I don't know what the average weight was for the clients. I don't have it in front of me, but I assume it.
Yeah, they'd have to be bigger, I would assume.
Because
it's a lot.
Yeah, because I do have a couple people I've worked with that are over 300 pounds that have lost 40, 50, 60 pounds in the first.
It's all relative, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like if you hop on it, you're probably gonna lose 50 pounds because you're fucking huge.
Yeah.
Nice.
See that toothpick right there?
What were you gonna talk about?
Oh yeah, wild experiences with like fat loss drugs. I remember in high school I took Hydroxycut. No reason to take Hydroxycut. Just wanted abs. You ever take that?
No.
That stuff was crazy. It kept in like a little glass behind Vitamin Shop.
Yeah, because it kills people.
Yeah, that and Oxy Elite Pro.
Oh.
Like that would be the today's standards of taking Nugenix, the one that's on the Frank Thomas commercials. Like I took that in high school.
That's probably healthier, honestly.
Yeah, honestly. All right, what you got? What else?
That's all I got, man. I mean, I got a bunch of other stuff on here, but I probably should go help my wife with the kids.
Yeah,
I hear people running around upstairs.
All right.
So we'll catch up next time. Some
Yeah.
good topics there, and we'll work on getting somebody on. I got a long list of people. Nobody could just make it this week, but I had people that were interested still. So we'll get somebody on here next time.
Yep. All right.
Goodbye.